Hi, Rabbi Schiff.
Hi.
So first, tell us who you are, tell us where you are, and your connection to JRoots.
Um, as to who I am, I don't know. I guess I'm still on the journey, which is why JRoots is about Jewish journeys. But I have the privilege of being the founder and director of JRoots with my good friend Tzvi Sperber, which is part of the family of organizations that sit on a platform called Jewish Futures, which are offer many different pathways of engagement for young Jewish people to be involved in their own Jewish journey. JRoots was founded 15 years ago, and it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be part of this special journey.
And where are you today?
Today I'm in London, although Libi b'Mizrach v'ani b'sof ma'arav. I always wish I was in Israel, but I've been in London for 20 years, directing Jewish Futures and many other organizations.
So today is Yom HaShoah, and we're discussing specifically the testimony of survivors, which is work you've been involved in for upwards of 30 years. Can you tell us how you became interested in survivor stories? Like, where did this start?
Sure. To tell you the truth, some people in my family will say I'm a bit obsessed with the Holocaust and with survivors, and I guess in a way it is true because I have travelled tens of thousands of miles over the last 15, 20 years in order to meet with survivors anywhere. But the truth is that if I'm honest with myself, which I try to be, and with others as well, I was, in a way, I actually made a decision when I was younger not to be involved in Holocaust education because I felt it was very negative. I felt that it would be a much more positive and compelling connection for young Jewish people to be involved in the life force of Judaism, the philosophy, the festivals, the practice, the positive connections, as opposed to 6 million dead Jews and the Jewish history is replete with people who wanted to get rid of us. And if I look back, my connection with survivors in particular. I guess when I was a kid, there's one experience that stands out. I was probably about 10 or 11 years old. I was in a public place with my mother. I had a kippah on my head, and suddenly my mother, sort of from behind me, whipped off my kippah. And I looked at her. I said, well, what happened? And she said, shh, she's a survivor. And there was a good friend of my mother's approaching us. I remember her name, I remember her face very clearly, and she was one of those people who I found out later was full of anger and angst about Judaism, about being Jewish, about the God that she didn't believe in, the faith that she'd abandoned. And my mother was very sensitive to that, and I'm very thankful for that because it really did sensitize me to the spectrum of approaches and relationship with being Jewish after the Holocaust. So that was something really imprinted on my memory. And a few years later, I had a teacher in school. His name was Dr. Alexander Fried. He taught me when I was about 15 or 16. And he was one of the few teachers, I must say, at that stage of my life who really grabbed my interest. And looking back on it, it was his authenticity, his genuineness that really grabbed my attention. And I fast forward 30 years, the truth is that as I said, I sort of in a way let go of Holocaust education because I felt it was a negative connotation with being Jewish. And it's only when we started JRoots and we started taking young groups of students to Poland more and more every year, and I felt the impact of these trips and the compelling nature of the survivors that I was meeting when we were taking on these trips, that I became much more attached to survivors and the stories and the lessons they have to share with us.
At some point, it sounds like this feeling you had against teaching the Shoah really transformed from a negative to a positive. Can you talk us through how that happened?
Over the course of 30 years of involvement with formal and informal education, I've been one of those people like many of us who've been struggling to grab the attention and the positive engagement of young people as they travel along their Jewish journey. And I've come to the conclusion that people impact people and the experiences impact people in a way that the classroom setting of any sort just doesn't do. Somebody lecturing from a lectern at the front of the classroom, that sort of form, it doesn't work as well. What does work is passion, authenticity, genuineness. And in JRoots, we've really had the privilege of combining those two. We literally take people on Jewish journeys, whether it's to Poland or other destinations around the world that carry a Jewish story. And mixed in with that has been this remarkable encounter with survivors. And almost retrospectively, I have understood that in a bizarre sort of way, it's not even necessarily the Holocaust story that has touched me so deeply about the survivors that I've met. As I said, it's more their authenticity. I think we live in a world that is more and more virtual. There's a virtual reality, an augmented reality. People are being marketed to and sold to all the time. But I think that in parenting, as well as education, and also being a rabbi myself, I think that which really touches people, really connects with people, is authenticity in a person. And survivors are amongst the most authentic people I have come across in my life, which is why I would say the truth is that the survivors I've met have become my greatest teachers. My greatest teachers are the most fundamental and important and deep-seated life lessons I think I've come from survivors in my adult life in the last 15 or 20 years.
So what is it that we're searching for with survivors, this authenticity?
I think we're all looking for authenticity in our lives. Nobody wants to live a virtual or augmented reality. Even to use the word reality next to augmented or virtual is an oxymoron. It's silly. We want to have real relationships. We don't really want to have, thumbs up on the screen means I like you. That's not like, that's not love, that's not connection. I think that often in life it takes extreme circumstances to wake us up, to shake us out of the mundane, the transient, the pettiness that so often engulfs us. I think this is something that we're all experiencing now in the lockdown of Corona 2020, and that's why the messages of survivors are so pertinent to us today on Yom HaShoah. And I hope that they remain with us forever. I think that survivors have stared death in the face. They went through such trauma. They lost so much. But having endured that, those of survivors who managed to come out the other side and managed to rebuild homes and build families, they don't need to pretend. There's no pretense about survivors. If they hate you, they'll tell you. If they hate God, they'll say it straight. If they want to be Jewish, they'll say so. If they want to leave it there, and that authenticity means that what they say is carries a truth with it that often in our society we just don't have. We don't have people that we can look into their eyes, ask them questions, and know that they're telling the truth because they don't have anything to hide.
We're living currently in unprecedented times. What lessons have you learned from survivors that can help us navigate this current situation?
So I mentioned it initially. Well, I was probing questions of faith because I was fascinated how anybody could go through such trauma, lose so much, see such cruelty and evil, and come out the other side and have faith and have belief. But very soon I discovered a set of values, many of which are universal to all of the survivors that I've met. And unfortunately, so many of these values are elusive in passing on to young people today. Resilience, persistence. I've stared into the eyes of tens of survivors and asked them on the death march from Auschwitz, January 1944, snow, starvation, freezing cold. You've lost everything. How did you keep going? How did you possibly keep going? And when I want to give up, and all of us in our lives, there are times when we want to give up, I have learned resilience, persistence, positivity, drive, even a joie de vivre from survivors. Survivors, because they came so close to death, perhaps, they relish every moment of life. They relish every family simcha, even though they weep tears, and even though they stand at the side, and it's not the same for them as it is for anybody else. But a simcha is a simcha. A family, when you've lost all your family, is something that you appreciate, and you'll give everything for. Hope in the future. I think an appreciation of other human beings. I think people who have seen such evil also recognize goodness in other people. They understand the capacity for love, ironically, more than others. Sometimes they're not able to impart that love, but I think that deep down they're yearning for love. And I've learned many lessons of love and tolerance and forgiveness and the humanity as a whole, not just the Jewish people, from many of the survivors that I've interviewed and spent time with.
So you, as you said, you've interviewed hundreds of survivors at this point. Do you have specific lines that have left an impression on you from survivors?
I do, but I love them all so much. It's difficult, and I think in a way I maybe in a romantic sense I sort of feel that I carry them with me on our mission to engage young Jewish people and to do what we can to ensure the vibrancy of the Jewish future. But as I said, everybody is in this search for money, for material goods. I remember standing at the end of the railway track with Bobby, Mrs. Eva Newman, in June 2006, and she told us a story about how she was working in Canada in the storehouses over there, and one day she found a dressing gown that was stuffed with diamonds. All the buttons were stuffed with diamonds, and she took off the button. She's working in the storehouse called Canada, to the end of the railway line. You know, the place that symbolizes the end of everything. She takes off the button. She finds diamonds, and she turned to Auschwitz and she said, "You know, in a place like Auschwitz, you realize that diamonds are not forever." You know, I used to be a big fan of James Bond. You know, diamonds are forever. I picked up a stone from the railway track, and I have a stone in my pocket every day. So when I hit the money in my pocket and I hit my credit cards and my car keys, the things that we think are important in life, I'm reminded that actually if I get the message that Bobby shared with me, that diamonds are not forever, and how fortunate we are in this generation, and what a responsibility we have in our generation that turned around from the end of the railway track where the nations of the world stood by and the most evil of them thought they brought us to the end of the line. What a responsibility to live in a generation where we have an Israel and we have a Yerushalayim, and even at this time we're being taken care of by governments around the world. It's an incredible thing to think about. I think one of the things that stands out, one of the lines is also from Bobby, but also from Pearl Banish, the idea of giving. To give is to live, that even in the darkest of times, I asked Pearl Banish, what was a lesson that her teacher gave her that took her through all the camps that she went through. And she said to me that there's a passage in the Talmud that says that even when there's a sword on your throat, even when you're in the most dire situation where all hope is lost, the Talmud says, Al yimna'at min harachamim. A person should not desist from mercy. Most people understand that as you shouldn't stop praying. Salvation can come at the last moment. She said to me, her teacher taught her that actually the words mean, it's not that you should keep praying for mercy. It's rather you should not hold back from being merciful. And I remember as if it was yesterday, she looked at me in the eyes. She said, Naftali, do you know how many people you can help in Auschwitz? Do you know how many people you can listen to when nobody's listening to anyone else's story? A shoulder to cry on. Do you know how much you can help? And I met this lady, Pearl Banish, 100 times maybe in the course of 25 years. And one of her mantras was, to give is to live. Giving is living. What more eternal message can there be than a message like that? Especially today where we began this journey of Corona with panic buying and everybody just worrying about themselves. To hear from people messages of love, where it could have just been pure hatred, to hear messages of giving, where it could have been purely selfish. I guess maybe that is why survivors have absolutely become the greatest teachers I've ever had in my life. And I'm somebody that many people try to teach. But I will sit for hours with survivors because they have a palpable sense of what life is about. You know, when you hear from somebody who has experienced such degradation, when you hear from them, you know, my mother taught me, just be a mensch. It doesn't matter what is going on. You stay a mensch. You stay a mensch when animals of human beings are turned into animals. If that guy Yaakov Yosef Weiss in Auschwitz can remain a mensch, then I guess when somebody takes my parking place, then I can too. But there are so many lessons. There are so many life lessons that I've been privileged to learn from all the survivors that I've met. And, you know, one of the projects that we've been working on in JRoots, we've actually called Shivim Panim, 70 faces. Because, you know, there's a tradition in Judaism that there are 70 different facets to the Torah, to understanding the Torah. So similarly, you know, the Holocaust is beyond us. It's unintelligible. It'll take a long time, if ever, for anybody to rationally make sense of what went on. And the responses to the Holocaust are 6 million people, 6 million responses. We can't judge any survivor for the way they reacted. But what we've tried to do with this project of Shivim Panim is to capture the soul, the life legacy of almost like the collective soul of the Jewish people, so that we can download it and pass it on to future generations, where Holocaust education, I think, needs to move on from facts, from cold testimony, to somehow what is it in the Jewish soul that turned around from Auschwitz and rebuilt Jewish families, rebuilt communities, built an Israel 3 years after the Holocaust. How is that possible? And I think that there is so much to learn from survivors of all types, so much humanity, so much faith, so much love, resilience, persistence. And all of those are words and values that, if we're honest with ourselves, as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, as rabbis, we struggle in today's world to pass over in a compelling, in an engaging, and quite frankly, in an authentic way to our children. And therefore, I have spared no personal effort and organizational effort to meet with as many survivors as possible of all types, so that we can capture their soul and bring it in the most compelling way to future generations of the Jewish people. And I hope that when they hear survivors like Yosef Lefkovich uttering the words Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people lives. He adds Od Avinu Chai, our Father is also alive. But they just take on a whole different level and depth of understanding when heard from a survivor.
Rabbi, I know that recently JRoots was involved in the Auschwitz 75 commemorations. Can you open up a window for us, what that was like, and also share with us some of the emotions you experienced at that time?
We were very privileged to be invited by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation to partner with them for the commemoration in Auschwitz of the 75th year of liberation of Auschwitz. Our particular remit was to take care of the survivors and their children, and in some cases, third generation, their grandchildren. There were about 120 survivors, maybe 500 people in the delegation altogether, including all their families, from all over the world. I think there were 20 countries. They were all survivors of Auschwitz, and all of them carried a different story and different emotions and had lived very different lives after the war. It was a remarkable experience. And for me, personally, at some moments during those 4 or 5 days, I sort of felt that everything I'd experienced in my life to that point almost came to a crescendo when I was walking around with a lanyard, saying, Rabbi Naftali Schiff. Okay, you're the rabbi, so you're the guy that we let out all our anger about God, about Judaism, about Shabbos, about kosher, about evil. Right, you're the rabbi, you're the target. Thank God I spent 30 years in Jewish education, and maybe the story that I said before about my mother taking my kippah off when I was 10 or 11 years old out of sensitivity to a survivor, it always remained with me. Who am I? Who are we in our generation to judge anybody, especially somebody who lost all their family at the age of 10? And you saw the most bestial of actions. So I think in a way everything kicked in, and I was able to sit with survivors of all different types, all over the age of 80, many over the age of 90. They were sharing their stories, but it was much more than a story. They poured out their soul, their own challenge of how do they deal after the war with the idea of building a family again. Is it going to be a Jewish family? Am I going to bring children into this awful world? And there were so many different types of people. For me, it was a big lesson of tolerance as well. I said I began my journey interviewing survivors about faith and about belief and about trust. And I'll be honest with you, I found myself standing on the railway tracks with we had 2 or 3 camera crews there because we wanted to capture the soul and the legacy of survivors. I specifically went up to 2 elderly ladies who I'd spent quite a lot of time with over the 2 or 3 days. And I begged them to speak to me about the challenges they have with being Jewish, about the difficulty they have in believing in a God. And they said, why, Rabbi, why do you want me to do that? I just asked you to say Kaddish for my parents. And these are people who 3 or 4 days before certainly didn't want to say Kaddish. They said, why do you want me to do that? And I said to both of them, because I want other Jews to understand that they don't understand. We live in a world that is so judgmental. There's so many different types of Jews. Shivim panim, 70 faces, so many different types. And yet we're also convinced that we're right and everybody else is wrong, to the extent we're not even willing to listen. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from survivors as well is so often I've stood in gas chambers with survivors, and all of them related how the last sound that was heard in the gas chamber was Shema Yisrael. Now, Shema Yisrael is an opportunity for a rabbi to give a lecture on what Shema Yisrael means. But one of the most important life lessons I learned from survivors is I had always thought that Shema Yisrael is a proclamation. Shema Yisrael! It's a proclamation of my faith. It's a declaration. You know, listen, Jews, Hashem. You know, there's this God, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What I learned from survivors standing there in the gas chamber is maybe there's a time to proclaim, and maybe there's a time to declare, but there's also a time, Shema Yisrael, to listen to your fellow Jew. If it weren't for survivors, maybe I wouldn't have listened. But I understood sitting at the feet with the utmost humility in the face of giants, of heroes of the last century, people who survived, people who could have given up. So many gave up. And we can't judge them. But some people didn't give up. Some people had something in them that kept going. For some of them, it was Blai Bayid, the last thing their parents said to them. Blai Bayid, be a Jew. For some people, it was live and bear witness. Whatever it was a drive to keep going and keep going and keep going. And I've said many times, I say it to myself, I say it to my kids, and I say it to my students, so many times in life, we want to give up. We want to give up on ourselves, on each other, on a project we're working on a dream. You know, okay, let's give up. If I have one request for my generation and my children's generation, look in the eyes of the survivors that we're bringing to you, and never, 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 never give up. If they put one foot in front of another, in a pair of clogs, in rags, in the freezing cold winter of 1944, so in 2020 and in 2050, we can't give up. And even though there are tears going down my face, there are also tears of pride in what we are. Yom HaShoah and the legacy of survivors has to be so much more than just evidential testimony. We must tap into the soul, the neshama, the life lessons, that if we take them and if we receive the baton in this fast closing window of opportunity, whilst there are still some survivors amongst us, if we take that baton, we can carry it into the future and we can finish the job that they survived to see. A kinder world, a better world, a more giving world, a believing world, a world where we're all united together and recognizing the good in one another and not the deficiencies.